The car had been moving at 110 kilometers per hour on the Onitsha-Enugu Expressway at 6:17 on a Friday morning when Kolade Owusu-Boateng, sitting in the back seat with a briefing document open on his lap and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, looked out the window and saw the boy. He did not say anything for 4 seconds. Then he said, "Stop the car." His driver, a careful man named Emmanuel, who had been driving Kolade for 9 years and had learned to distinguish between the different tones of his employer's voice the way a musician learns to distinguish intervals, pulled the car to the side of the road without asking why. He had heard this particular tone once before, years ago, outside a hospital in Lagos, and he had learned then that it was the tone that came before something significant. The car stopped on the red laterite shoulder of the road, 40 meters past where the boy was sitting, and Kolade took off his reading glasses and set the briefing document face down on the seat, and looked in the side mirror for a long time without moving. The boy was on a low wooden stool beside the road. Working, that was the first thing. He was working, not waiting, not sleeping, not watching the cars go past. He was bent over a shoe with his whole body in the task, and the particular quality of his concentration, visible even at this distance and at this hour, was the kind that belonged to a person who had forgotten there was anyone watching. A kerosene lantern sat beside him on the ground, its light mixing with the first thin gray of the morning sky. The road before him was empty, except for a goat moving slowly in the far ditch and a woman with a basin on her head about 300 meters north. He was 13 years old. He weighed 41 kilograms. He had been thin since he was 8, which was the year his father left Onitsha for Port Harcourt for a contract job that paid every second month and then every fourth month, and then not at all, and the 3 people remaining in the house on Umuoba Road. Dubem, his mother and his 7-year-old sister Adaura, had learned to rearrange what they needed around what they had. Dubem was the eldest. He had taken that role the way a door takes a wind, not by choosing to, but because he was the one in the frame. His school uniform was ironed. It was pressed and pale blue, and the collar was done to the top button, and the fact that it was ironed at 6:17 in the morning while he sat in red road dust fixing a stranger's shoe said something about him that no one had ever put into words, but that everyone who looked at him for more than a moment felt somewhere in their chest. He had ironed it himself the night before, using the charcoal iron his mother kept on the shelf above the stove, pressing each section slowly and correctly, the way she had shown him when he was 9, collar first, then the placket, then each sleeve laid flat. He did this every evening, not because someone required it, because the uniform was the proof that he was going, and he was always going. He kept his earnings in a condensed milk tin with a slit cut in the lid. The tin sat beside the lantern. This morning it held 2,850 naira, 19 days of mornings, 150 naira per pair of shoes, 6 pairs on a good morning, 2 on a slow one. He needed 12,500 naira for the first term school fees, and he had been saving since July, and it was now September, and he was almost 2/3 there. He had not calculated the second term fees yet. He had a rule about not calculating what came after what you were working on, because that was how a person discouraged themselves before they had to be. His fee was 150 naira. Fixed. He had set it at 200 naira when he started, and a man had laughed at him and said the boy at the next junction did it for 80, and Dubem had said nothing and done the work, and when the man reached for 80 naira, Dubem had said quietly that his fee was 150. The man had left. 2 days later he came back with 2 pairs of shoes. Dubem had not changed the price again, because the lesson he had taken from that exchange was not about flexibility. It was about what happens when you hold a line. 3 weeks before this Friday morning, Dubem had gone to the school to confirm his first term enrollment, and the secretary behind the desk A woman named Mrs. Bright, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and a nameplate so small it was nearly decorative, had told him that the fees had increased. The printed notice on the board behind her said 14,200 naira, not 12,500. The school had adjusted the rate at the start of the new academic year, and the adjustment had been communicated through a letter that had been sent home with current students, which Dubem was not, and so he had not received it. He had stood at that desk with 8,350 naira in his pocket, 2 months of mourning, and looked at 14,200 on the board. He had not argued. He had not asked her to make an exception. He had looked at the number the way he looked at most things he could not immediately solve, steadily, until he had finished absorbing it. And then he had folded the confirmation form and put it in his shirt pocket and said, "I'll come back when I have the full amount." Mrs. Bright had said the enrollment deadline was the 15th of October. He had nodded once. He had walked out. October 15th was 19 days away. He had done the arithmetic on the road home. He needed 5,850 more naira in 19 mornings, which meant averaging 308 naira per morning, which meant he needed to do at minimum 2 pairs on every morning, and sometimes 3. And on the slow mornings, the rainy mornings, the mornings when the road traffic was thin, he needed to do something he had not yet done, which was charge 200 naira for the difficult repairs. The resoling jobs, the ones that took 30 minutes instead of 15. He had thought about this for 3 days and decided he would introduce a tiered rate. Not for the simple heel caps, for the full resoling work, which required more of his rubber stock and twice the time. 200 naira. He would put a small handwritten sign beside the lantern. He had not yet told his mother about the increase in the school fees. He had not told her because telling her would make it her problem too, and she was already carrying enough. He had decided to tell her when he had the money. He would walk in with the receipt and say, "I sorted it." What Kolade was looking at from the side mirror, though he would not have used these words for it, was a person who had already decided who they were going to be before the world had given them any particular reason to be that way. But that was not what had stopped the car. What had stopped the car was the way Dubem was holding the shoe. He held the last between his knees, not in a vise, not on a stand, but gripped just below the widest point of the heel block, with his left knee slightly elevated, and his right knee angled out at exactly the degree required to keep the counter stable without clamping. It was a body posture technique, not a tool technique. It required the person to have internalized the geometry of the shoe from the inside out, to know by sensation where the stress points were and how to distribute counter pressure without leaving marks in the leather. It was not something you could look up. It was not something any training manual described. It was something you learned from a person who had learned it from a person, passed down through demonstration, corrected by hand. Kolade's father had held a shoe exactly this way. Kolade had watched him do it on a low stool in the workshop on Oguta Road in Onitsha for the first 13 years of his life. He had not seen another person do it since his father died. Emmanuel, the driver, had noticed it first, which was why he had mentioned it, and Kolade had looked up from the briefing document. And now he was in the side mirror and the kerosene light was catching the angle of the boy's left knee. And Kolade was not blinking. He opened the car door. The laterite shoulder crunched under his shoes, Italian leather, made in Florence, bought in Abuja, worth more per pair than Dubem's condensed milk tin held in 4 months. He was wearing a dark gray senator suit because he had come from a meeting the night before that he had not had time to change from. He walked the 40 meters back to where the boy was sitting, and his shadow arrived before he did because the kerosene lantern was behind him. And Dubem looked up. He did not scramble. He did not stand. He looked at the man the way you look at a car that has stopped near you on a road, with the steady, watchful attention of someone who has learned to assess things quickly and respond to what is actually there, not to what might be. Kolade said, "Who taught you to hold it that way?" Dubem looked at his knee. He looked at Kolade. He said, "An old man. Up the road." "What old man?" "He sells thread and needles. He's there every morning. He showed me when I started." Kolade said nothing for a moment. He looked at the shoe in the boy's hands. It was a size 42 men's brogue, brown leather, with a worn-through heel cap that Dubem had already cleaned and was in the process of relasting before applying a new rubber heel block. The work was correct. The work was, if he was being precise about it, the work of someone who understood what they were doing. He said, "How long have you been doing this?" 14 months. Every morning, Monday through Saturday. I stop at 7:15 for school." Kolade looked at the tin. He looked at the lantern. He looked at the school uniform collar, done to the top button in the gray morning light, and something passed through his face that Emmanuel, watching from the car, recognized as the expression Kolade wore when he was recalculating. He said, "What school?" Dubem told him. He told him the school fees and the amount in the tin and the date he expected to finish saving, and he told it the way he told everything, directly, without self-pity, as a report of facts. He did not ask for anything. He was answering the questions he had been asked. If this story is already moving in you the way I think it is, subscribe now, because what happens when Kolade walks 40 meters further up that road is going to change what you thought this story was about. Kolade said, "I can pay your school fees." Dubem looked at him. Both terms. "I can pay today." Dubem was quiet for a moment. He set the brogue down on his knee and looked at it. Then, he looked at the condensed milk tin. He looked at the 19 days of mornings it represented, and the 19 mornings before that, and the mornings before those, all the way back to the first morning when he had set the stool on the laterite and arranged his tools, and waited, and nothing had come until 7:05 a.m. When a man in work boots had stopped and looked at him with the specific skepticism reserved for children doing adult work, and Dubem had not looked away, and the man had handed him the boots. He said, "My sister also needs fees. She's in primary 3. It's 7,200 naira per term." Kolade said, "I'll pay hers too." "Both terms?" "Both terms." Dubem looked at him again, the same steady assessing look, taking the full measure of the offer, and the man making it the way he took the measure of a shoe before touching it, checking the structure before the surface. He said, "Why?" It was a fair question, and Kolade had been expecting it, and he did not have a complete answer yet, which was an unusual experience for him. He said, "Because of the way you hold the shoe. I need to understand where you learned it." Dubem pointed up the road. What Kolade felt walking those 40 meters was something he had not felt on a road in a long time. The harmattan was coming. He could smell it in the air, the particular dryness that carried the fine red dust of the north, the smell of his childhood Octobers, of leather adhesive and coal pot smoke, and the workshop on Oguta Road where his father had worked from 6 in the morning until the light failed, the kind of work that asked everything of a person and gave them their shape in return. He had not thought about that smell in years. He thought about it now. The old man was already there. He was always already there. Al Danjuma was 79 years old and had been sitting at his station on this stretch of road for 22 years. A wooden crate upended as a seat. A small tray of cotton thread in 4 colors. Packets of all needles. A roll of waxed linen. and a worn leather apron folded over one end of the crate. He sold to the other cobblers, and to the market tailors, and to whoever needed him. He was not difficult to overlook. He was the kind of presence that a road accumulates over years, necessary and permanent, and almost invisible because of both. He looked up when Kolade stopped in front of him. He looked at the suit. He looked at Kolade's face for a long time, the way old people look at faces when they are searching for something specific. He said, quietly, in Igbo, "Emeka's boy." Kolade went still. Nobody had called his father Emeka in 31 years. His father's name was Chukwuemeka Owusu Boateng, and the people who had known him as a young man in Onitsha had called him Emeka, and those people were almost all gone. Kolade said, "You knew my father." The old man said he had worked beside him for 11 years. He said they had shared a workshop on Oguta Road from 1974 to 1985, when Kolade's father had moved to a bigger space near the Onitsha Bridge. He said, "Your father was the best cobbler I ever saw," and the way he said it had the particular weight of a sentence that has been true for a long time and simply not been said aloud. He said, "I taught the boy that grip because your father taught it to me." I didn't tell him where it came from. I didn't think anyone would ask. He had been sitting on this road for 22 years. His hands were in his lap. He did not seem surprised by this conversation, only satisfied by it, the way a person is satisfied when something they have been waiting for without naming it finally arrives. Kolade sat down on the laterite beside his crate. His gray senator suit collected the red road dust, and he did not appear to notice. He stayed there for 47 minutes. He heard about his father's hands. He heard about the workshop on Oguta Road, which had smelled of leather adhesive and harmattan dust, and the coal pot the other workers kept burning through the dry season. He heard about the bench his father had built from scrap timber in 1976. The bench that tilted 6 degrees forward because one leg had been cut slightly short. And his father had never fixed it, because he said the tilt put the work at exactly the right angle. He heard about the argument his father had with a customer in 1979 over a pair of Oxford shoes. An argument Danjuma described in such precise detail that Kolade laughed for the first time that morning, because his father had told that same story at the dinner table at least a dozen times. He heard that his father had once lent Danjuma 2 months of earnings when his wife was sick, and had never mentioned it again, and when Danjuma had tried to repay it, his father had said the amount had been forgotten. Kolade had not known that. He had thought he knew his father. He had known the version of his father who sat at the dinner table and told stories, and ironed his own agbada, and believed that a man's work was the most honest thing about him. He had not known the version that sat on a low stool on Oguta Road at 29 years old and lent 2 months of earnings to a friend and forgot it on purpose. He sat with that version for a while. Emmanuel came and sat near the crate without being asked, because he had worked for Kolade long enough to know when to be present. He did not speak. He looked at the road. The goat that had been in the far ditch had moved on. The woman with the basin on her head was gone. The morning had fully arrived, the harmattan light flat and white above the tree line, the traffic on the expressway beginning to build, the sound of the market 2 kilometers east starting its day. Danjuma sold 3 packets of needles to a tailor who passed while they were talking. He did not interrupt the conversation to do it. He counted the change from memory without looking. The school fees were paid by mobile transfer before 9 a.m. Both children. Both terms. Dubem's mother received the confirmation on her phone while she was hanging washing in the yard on Umoba Road, a blue school uniform. Adaura's, still damp, pinned at the shoulders. And she read the SEMS 3 times, her lips moving on the third, and then she sat down on the concrete step and did not move for 6 minutes. The washing line moved in the small morning wind. The uniform turned slowly. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chinway, saw her from the window and came running and knocked on the gate, and Debem's mother had to say several times, standing up with the phone still in her hand, that she was fine. She was fine. She just needed to sit. 3 months later, the Owusu Boa Tongue Foundation opened a vocational skills workshop at the Federal Polytechnic Oko, 41 kilometers from Onitsha, in a building that had been a storage room and was now painted and lit and fitted with 12 workbenches. The workshop was named for Chukwuemeka Owusu Boateng. On the wall beside the door, printed on a wooden board, was a single line. He believed a man's work was the most honest thing about him. Al Danjuma was named master instructor. He was given a salary, a room in the staff quarters, and an apron, dark brown leather, new, made to his measurements. He ran the first cohort of 19 students on a Monday morning in January, and he opened the first lesson by demonstrating the grip. The left knee elevated, the right angled out, the heel block suspended between, and he told them where it came from, which was something he had not done in 42 years, and the room was quiet, and the way rooms are quiet when the people in them understand that. What they are being given is older than they are. Dubem was in that first cohort. He had asked to be. He was still in school. Kalade had ensured that and would continue to. But he came on Saturdays, which Danjuma allowed because Dubem was the reason the workshop existed, and Danjuma was old enough to understand that certain circles needed to be completed. Adaura, Dubem's sister, who was 7 and sharp-eyed and had her brother's habit of watching things carefully before she spoke, came once to collect him on a Saturday afternoon. She stood in the doorway of the workshop and looked at the 12 workbenches, and the men bent over them and the old instructor moving between them with his hands and his corrections. She looked at it the way she looked at things, completely, without blinking. Then she went and sat beside her brother and watched him work, and when Danjuma passed behind her, he looked down and said, in Igbo, that she had her grandmother's hands. She did not know what that meant yet, but she kept coming on Saturdays, and by March she was learning the grip. Kalade drove that road again 6 months after the first morning. He was in the back seat again, briefing document again, reading glasses again. He came around the bend at the place where the shoulder widened, and he looked out the window. The stool was still there. The lantern was gone. It was midday. The condensed milk tin was gone. On the stool there was a newer wooden box, hinged, with tools inside, and beside it a hand-painted sign on a piece of board that said, Dubem, shoe repair, 150 naira, and the lettering was careful and level and done with the same kind of attention as the ironed collar. He was not there. He was at school. Emmanuel said nothing. He drove past. In the mirror, Kolade looked at the stool until the road curved and it disappeared. Kolade Owusu Boateng told his driver to stop because of the way a boy held a shoe. What he found when he stopped was not only a boy who needed school fees, and not only an old man who had been invisible on a road for 22 years. What he found was the part of his father he had not known was still in the world. You cannot always know what a skill carries with it. The thing your parent put into your hands on a low stool in a small room, the grip, the method, the specific angle of the knee, it does not end with you. It travels. It lands in another pair of hands and works through them and waits, not knowing it is waiting, until the morning someone with the right eyes drives past and stops and asks the only question that matters. Where did you learn that? Some things are not lost when the people who made them die. They live in the work, in the stance, In the 14 months of mornings of a boy who learned from an old man, who learned from your father, and who holds the last exactly right, at 6:17 in the morning, in the gray light before school. If the skill your parent gave you, the one that felt too small to matter, too ordinary to keep, turned out to be the key to someone else's life, would you have recognized it in time? Would you have kept it? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.